Imagine being handed a simple, almost boring business opportunity. You invest in a water vending machine. It gets placed in a neighborhood somewhere, thirsty people pay a few cents for clean water, and you collect passive income. Clean, simple, almost noble. The only problem, most of those machines never existed, and every dollar you earned came straight out of the pocket of the next person standing in line behind you. This is the story of one of the most brazen Ponzi schemes in recent memory, a fraud that hid behind a basic human need, weaponized trust, and quietly drained over $200 million from thousands of ordinary investors before it finally collapsed. And here's the thing that should make you stop and think for a second. This scheme wasn't run from an offshore account by shadowy criminals in a foreign country. It operated right here, in broad daylight, with real machines, real brochures, real offices, and a sales force that believed every word they were selling. We'll get to how that was possible in a moment, because the answer is stranger and more disturbing than you might expect. Let's go back to the beginning. The concept was built around a genuinely real problem. Access to clean drinking water is one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. In parts of the United States and Latin America, communities pay premium prices for bottled water or have inconsistent tap water quality. Enter the water vending machine, a coin-operated or card-operated kiosk that dispenses purified water at a fraction of the cost of bottled alternatives. These machines do exist. They are a legitimate business in some markets. That's what made this so effective. The company at the center of this story sold investors on a straightforward proposition: purchase one or more machines for a set price, typically several $1,000s each. The company would handle installation, maintenance, and operations. Investors would then receive a share of the vending revenue, passive income, month after month, just for owning the machine. It sounded less like a financial product and more like owning a small, reliable business. No stock market volatility, no complicated contracts, just clean water and quiet returns. Salespeople spread the pitch through churches, community organizations, and social networks. In communities that had historically been underserved by traditional financial institutions, the appeal was enormous. This wasn't Wall Street. This was something you could understand, something you could touch, or so investors believed. Now here's the first crack in the story, and this is important. Investigators who later examined the company's records found that the number of machines actually deployed was a fraction of what had been sold to investors. Hundreds of investors had purchased machines that were never manufactured, never installed, and never generated a single dollar of legitimate water revenue. The income investors received, the monthly checks that kept them believing, wasn't coming from water sales. It was coming from new investors buying new machines. That is the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme. Earlier investors get paid not from real business activity, but from the capital of people recruited after them. Think of it like a bucket with a hole in the bottom. As long as someone keeps pouring water in from the top, the bucket never appears empty. But the moment the flow of new investors slows down, the whole thing drains dry, fast. And yet, here's the open question that haunted investigators. How did this go on as long as it did? How did thousands of people, many of them financially savvy enough to diversify their savings, not see the warning signs? Part of the answer is affinity fraud. This term describes schemes that target a specific community, a religious group, an ethnic group, a profession, exploiting the trust that already exists within those networks. When your pastor mentions an investment, or when your cousin who you've known your whole life vouches for an opportunity, your skepticism drops. Fraudsters know this. They deliberately cultivate relationships with respected community figures, sometimes making them unwitting promoters, sometimes cutting them in for a referral fee. The result is a social web of trust that insulates the lie. But there's a second layer here that's even more chilling. Some of the people selling these machines genuinely believed in them. They had received their own monthly checks. They had seen glossy photographs of machines placed in parking lots and convenience stores. They had attended company presentations in hotel conference rooms with professional slides and polished spokespeople. From where they were standing, the business was real. And that sincere belief made them extraordinarily convincing salespeople because they weren't lying. They were deceived, and they passed that deception forward. Now, the escalation. As with every Ponzi scheme, the math is unforgiving. The more investors you bring in, the more monthly payments you owe. The gap between what is promised and what the underlying business actually generates widens every single month. To cover that gap, you need a relentless flood of new capital, and eventually, always, without exception, that flood slows to a trickle. When investors began asking harder questions, when payments started coming late, when the company's explanations started sounding thin, that's when the house of cards began to shake. Complaints were filed with state regulators. Then federal regulators got involved. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation. What they found when they pulled back the curtain was, in the words of one enforcement action, a classic Ponzi scheme, sustained almost entirely by new investor funds, with the vast majority of machine inventory existing only on paper. The human cost is the part that gets lost in the headlines. We talk about $200 million as though it's an abstraction. It isn't. It's the retirement savings of a 63-year-old who wanted one more stream of income before she stopped working. It's the college fund a family had spent a decade building. It's the small inheritance a man used to try to do something smart with money he'd never had before. These are the real victims, people who made a reasonable decision based on information they had no way of knowing was false, and many of them will never recover what they lost. So what does this story teach us? First, if an investment promises consistent, reliable returns that seem disconnected from the volatility of any real market, that is a warning sign, not a selling point. Real businesses have good months and bad months. Suspiciously smooth returns are often a sign that someone is managing your perception, not managing a business. Second, be especially cautious when an investment opportunity comes through a trusted social network. Affinity fraud is effective precisely because your guard is down. The question to ask isn't whether you trust the person pitching you, it's whether that person has independently verified what they're selling, or whether they're also just a believer in the pitch. And third, ask to see proof of the underlying asset. If you're told you own a machine, ask for documentation of where that machine is located, who operates it, and what it has actually earned. If those answers are vague, incomplete, or met with frustration, walk away. The water vending machine Ponzi didn't survive because it was sophisticated. It survived because it was simple, it was warm, and it was built on trust. That's the most dangerous kind of fraud there is. Not the complicated financial engineering of a Wall Street scandal, but the quiet, handshake in the church basement kind. The kind that looks exactly like a good idea, right up until the moment it doesn't. If you want to keep learning how to spot these schemes before they spot you, subscribe. We cover financial fraud, corporate corruption, and market collapses every single week. And there's a video right next to this one on affinity fraud that goes even deeper on how these networks of trust get weaponized. Leave a comment below. Would you have been convinced by this pitch? What would have made you pause? I genuinely want to know.